You think you know yourself. You wake up every morning, look in the mirror, and believe you understand the person staring back at you. But what if everything you assumed about your personality, the way you think, the way you love, the way you fear, the way you dream, was built on a foundation far stranger and more magnificent than you ever imagined? What if the very core of who you are was shaped by forces you never saw coming, forces buried in your genes, hidden in your childhood memories, coded into the chemistry of your brain, and woven into the fabric of every relationship you have ever known? This is a journey into the most complex landscape ever discovered, not the depths of the ocean, not the far reaches of outer space, but the inner world of human personality. Over the course of this documentary, we will walk through 100 of the most surprising, counterintuitive, and deeply fascinating facts about what makes you, you. Some of these facts will challenge what you believe, some will unsettle you, and some will change the way you see every single person you have ever met. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this documentary and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. Now, let us begin. There's a moment in every human life, so early that no memory can reach it, when personality begins to emerge. Most people believe that personality is something we develop over time, that it is shaped entirely by experience, by the schools we attend, the parents who raise us, the heartbreaks we endure. But the truth is far more startling. Personality begins before you ever open your eyes to the world. Research conducted across decades of developmental psychology has demonstrated that temperament, the raw foundation upon which personality is built, is observable in newborn infants within the first hours of life. Some babies are calm, some are reactive, some are curious, some are cautious. These are not random fluctuations. These are the earliest signatures of a personality that will echo across an entire lifetime. Scientists studying neonatal behavior discovered that the way a newborn responds to a sudden loud noise, or to being held by a stranger, or even to the sensation of a cold surface against the skin, can predict behavioral tendencies that persist into adolescence and beyond. A baby who startles dramatically and cries at a loud clap is more likely to become a cautious, inward-focused child. A baby who barely reacts, who seems almost indifferent to surprise, is more likely to become bold, outgoing, and socially adventurous. This does not mean that destiny is sealed at birth, but it means that personality does not arrive as a blank page. It arrives as a rough draft, one that life will revise but never entirely rewrite. And here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. You might assume that the most powerful force shaping personality after birth is parenting. After all, parents control nearly every aspect of a child's early environment. They choose the food, the bedtime, the school, the neighborhood, the values, the rules. But decades of behavioral genetics research have revealed something that made even seasoned scientists pause. Shared family environment, meaning the aspects of life that siblings raised in the same home experience together, accounts for a remarkably small proportion of personality differences between people. In study after study, the influence of shared environment on adult personality traits like extroversion, conscientiousness, and openness to experience hovers near zero. This does not mean parents do not matter. Of course they do, but their influence operates in ways far more subtle and individualized than we once believed. What matters most is not the general family atmosphere, but the unique, unrepeatable relationship between one specific parent and one specific child. Two siblings can grow up in the same house, eat the same dinners, attend the same school, and emerge as strikingly different human beings, not because one was loved more than the other, but because each child experiences the family through a different lens, occupies a different role, and extracts different meaning from the same set of events. This leads to one of the most profound revelations in all of personality science. The single largest environmental influence on personality is what researchers call the non-shared environment, the collection of experiences that are unique to each individual, even within the same family. These include different friendships, different teachers, different chance encounters, different illnesses, different moments of triumph and failure. It is the accumulation of these singular, unrepeatable experiences that sculpts the fine details of who we become. In other words, the forces that shape your personality most powerfully are the ones that no one else in your family, not your parents, not your siblings, can ever fully know or share. Now let us turn to genetics, because this is where the story becomes even more surprising. When scientists first began studying the heritability of personality traits, they expected to find that some traits would be moderately heritable and others would not. What they found instead was a pattern so consistent that it became known informally as the first law of behavioral genetics. Virtually every measurable human behavioral trait is partially heritable. Extroversion is heritable. Neuroticism is heritable. Agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness to experience, all heritable. The heritability estimates for major personality traits typically fall between 40 and 60%. This means that roughly half of the variation in personality across the human population can be attributed to genetic differences. But here is the twist that most people miss. Heritability does not mean destiny. A trait being 50% heritable does not mean that 50% of your personality was determined at conception. It means that 50% of the differences between people in a given population can be statistically linked to genetic variation. Your individual personality is the product of a dance between your genes and your environment, a dance so intricate, so responsive, so dynamic that no scientist alive can fully predict the outcome for any single person. Genes load the gun, environment pulls the trigger, and personality is the sound the shot makes as it echoes through a life. There is another genetic finding that deserves attention because it overturns a common assumption. Many people believe that personality traits are controlled by one or two powerful genes, a gene for shyness, a gene for aggression, a gene for optimism. The reality is far more complex. Personality traits are polygenic, meaning they are influenced by thousands of genetic variants, each contributing an almost imperceptibly small effect. There is no single gene for introversion. There is no single gene for kindness. Instead, there are vast constellations of genetic influences, each nudging behavior in one direction or another, their combined effect producing the rich and varied landscape of human personality. This is why no two humans, not even identical twins, are ever perfectly alike in personality. The system is simply too complex, too sensitive to the unique conditions of each life. Speaking of identical twins, their stories have provided some of the most jaw-dropping evidence in personality research. Identical twins share 100% of their DNA. If they are raised together, they share the same family environment as well. And yet, even identical twins raised in the same home show meaningful differences in personality. They may both be extroverted, but one may be slightly more assertive. They may both be conscientious, but one may be more orderly while the other is more achievement-driven. These differences arise from the non-shared environment, from the unique experiences, relationships, and random events that belong to each twin alone. But what happens when identical twins are separated at birth and raised in completely different families, in different cities, sometimes in different countries? The studies of reunited twins have produced findings so uncanny that they almost defy belief. Twins raised apart who have never met, who have no knowledge of each other's existence, frequently show striking similarities in personality, interests, habits, and even quirks. They choose similar careers, they laugh in the same way, they hold their coffee cups the same way, they develop the same nervous habits. One famous pair of reunited twins discovered that they had both married women with the same first name, divorced, and then married again to women who also shared the same first name. Another pair found that they had both become volunteer firefighters, both drove the same model of car, and both vacationed at the same beach. These are not coincidences. They are the visible fingerprints of a shared genetic blueprint expressing itself across two separate lives. The twins did not copy each other. They had never met, but their genes inclined them towards similar temperaments, similar preferences, similar ways of engaging with the world, and those inclinations, interacting with different but broadly similar environments, produced eerily parallel outcomes. This does not mean that genes dictate every choice. It means that genes create a gravitational field, a set of tendencies, preferences, and sensitivities that shapes the trajectory of a life in ways both large and small. Let us shift our attention now to one of the most widely studied frameworks in personality psychology, the Big Five model, also known as the five-factor model. This framework identifies 5 broad dimensions of personality that together capture the majority of meaningful variation in human behavior. These 5 dimensions are openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Each dimension exists on a spectrum. You are not simply extroverted or introverted, you fall somewhere along a continuum, and your position on that continuum influences how you interact with the world. What makes the Big Five remarkable is its robustness. It has been replicated across cultures, across languages, across age groups, and across methods of measurement. Whether researchers use self-report questionnaires, peer ratings, behavioral observations, or even linguistic analysis of personal writing, the same 5 factors consistently emerge. This is not because the Big Five is a perfect or exhaustive map of personality. It is not, but it captures something real and fundamental about the structure of human behavioral variation, something that transcends cultural boundaries and historical periods. Now here is a fact about the Big Five that surprises many people. Of all 5 dimensions, the one most strongly associated with life outcomes, with career success, with health, with longevity, with relationship stability, is not extroversion, as many would guess. It is conscientiousness. Conscientious individuals, those who are organized, disciplined, goal-oriented, and reliable, tend to live longer, earn more, maintain healthier relationships, and experience greater overall well-being than their less conscientious counterparts. The effect is not small. Studies tracking thousands of individuals over decades have found that conscientiousness in childhood is one of the strongest personality predictors of longevity, rivaling even well-known health behaviors like exercise and diet. Why does conscientiousness matter so much? Because it is, at its core, the personality dimension most closely linked to self-regulation, the ability to control impulses, delay gratification, plan for the future, and persist in the face of difficulty. A conscientious person does not simply want to succeed. They build systems, follow routines, honor commitments, and show up consistently, day after day. In a world full of distractions, temptations, and competing demands, conscientiousness functions as an internal compass, quietly steering behavior toward outcomes that accumulate over time into a well-lived life. But conscientiousness is not without its shadow side. Extremely high conscientiousness can shade into rigidity, perfectionism, and an inability to relax or adapt when plans go awry. The most conscientious individuals sometimes struggle with spontaneity, with letting go, with accepting that not everything can be controlled. They may hold themselves and others to impossibly high standards, generating stress and conflict in their relationships. Like every personality trait, conscientiousness is a tool, and like every tool, its value depends on how it is used and whether it is balanced by other qualities. Let us now explore extroversion, because this dimension is perhaps the most misunderstood of all. Popular culture tends to frame extroversion and introversion as a simple binary. Extroverts are outgoing and social, introverts are quiet and solitary, but the science reveals a far richer picture. Extroversion is not merely about sociability, it is fundamentally about sensitivity to reward. Extroverts are individuals whose brains respond more strongly to positive stimuli, to the anticipation of pleasure, to social approval, to novel experiences, to the thrill of achievement. Their reward circuitry is tuned to a higher frequency, which drives them to seek out stimulation, to take risks, and to engage actively with the world. Introverts, by contrast, are not antisocial. They are not shy. Shyness is a separate construct entirely. Introverts simply have a lower threshold for stimulation. They reach their optimal level of arousal more quickly, which means they are more easily overwhelmed by noisy, chaotic, or highly social environments. An introvert at a large party is not necessarily unhappy, but they may be overstimulated, processing more sensory and social information than they can comfortably manage. They recharge in solitude not because they dislike people, but because their nervous system needs time to return to a comfortable baseline. Here is a fact about introversion that many people find counterintuitive. Introverts are not less happy than extroverts on average. While extroverts tend to report higher levels of positive affect, the experience of frequent positive emotions, introverts are not languishing in misery. They simply experience happiness differently. Introverts often derive their deepest satisfaction from meaningful one-on-one conversations, from creative work, from quiet reflection, from the pleasure of mastering a skill in solitude. Their happiness is less visible, less performative, but no less real. There is a concept in personality psychology known as the free trait theory, proposed by psychologist Brian Little. This theory holds that while we all have fixed, biologically rooted personality traits, we are also capable of acting out of character, temporarily adopting behaviors that contradict our natural tendencies in the service of personally meaningful goals or what Little calls core projects. An introvert who deeply loves teaching may become animated and expressive in the classroom, performing extroversion with genuine energy and skill. An extrovert who cares deeply about a creative project may spend weeks in focused solitude, suppressing their natural desire for social engagement. But there is a cost. Acting out of character for extended periods creates what Little calls a state of physiological and psychological depletion. The introvert who performs extroversion all day needs what Little poetically calls a restorative niche, a quiet space, a solitary walk, a few hours of silence in which to recover. The extrovert who forces prolonged solitude may become restless, irritable, and emotionally flat. Understanding your own personality is not about boxing yourself into a fixed identity. It is about knowing your natural rhythms well enough to manage the inevitable moments when life demands that you step outside them. Now let us turn to neuroticism, the personality dimension that no one wants to claim, but that everyone, to some degree, carries. Neuroticism is the tendency to experience negative emotions, anxiety, sadness, irritability, self-doubt, guilt more frequently and more intensely than average. Individuals high in neuroticism are not broken or defective. They are simply wired to detect threats more readily, to anticipate problems more vividly, and to react to stress more strongly. Their emotional alarm system is set to a lower threshold, which means it goes off more often, sometimes in response to dangers that are real and sometimes in response to dangers that exist only in the imagination. Here is the surprising part. Neuroticism, despite its reputation as a purely negative trait, may have evolutionary advantages. In ancestral environments where physical dangers were constant and unpredictable, individuals who were hyper-vigilant, who anticipated threats before they materialized, who worried about what might go wrong, these individuals may have survived at higher rates than their more carefree counterparts. The anxious ancestor who heard a rustling in the bushes and assumed it was a predator may have been wrong 99 times out of 100. But on the 100th time, that anxiety saved their life. Neuroticism is the personality trait shaped by a world where paranoia was occasionally the price of survival. In the modern world, however, high neuroticism often creates more suffering than safety. The threats we face today, social rejection, financial uncertainty, professional failure, romantic disappointment, are rarely life-threatening, but a neurotic brain treats them as if they were. The result is chronic stress, rumination, and emotional exhaustion. People high in neuroticism are at greater risk for depression, anxiety disorders, and a range of stress-related health problems. They are also more likely to engage in unhealthy coping behaviors, overeating, substance use, social withdrawal, as they attempt to manage the relentless tide of negative emotion. But neuroticism is not destiny, and here is a fact that offers genuine hope. Personality traits, including neuroticism, are not as fixed as scientists once believed. For most of the 20th century, the dominant view in personality psychology was that traits stabilize in early adulthood and remain essentially unchanged for the rest of life. This view was captured in the famous dictum of psychologist William James, who wrote in 1890 that by the age of 30, character has set like plaster and will never soften again. But James was wrong. Modern longitudinal studies that track the same individuals over decades, have shown that personality continues to change throughout the lifespan. On average, people become more agreeable, more conscientious, and less neurotic as they age. This pattern, sometimes called the maturity principle, has been observed across cultures and historical periods. It suggests that the passage of time, the accumulation of experience, the deepening of relationships, and the assumption of adult responsibilities all contribute to a gradual softening and stabilization of personality. The anxious, impulsive 20-year-old often becomes the calm, reliable 40-year-old, not because they have been replaced by a different person, but because the same person has been slowly reshaped by the demands and rewards of adult life. This does not mean that personality change is automatic or effortless. Some people change more than others. Some people change in unexpected directions, and the rate and direction of change are influenced by life events, by relationships, by deliberate effort, and by sheer chance. But the central finding stands: personality is not a prison. It is a living system capable of growth, adaptation, and transformation across the entire arc of a human life. Let us now explore a dimension of personality that operates beneath conscious awareness, a dimension that most people do not even recognize as part of their personality, even though it profoundly shapes their behavior every single day. This is the dimension of attachment style. Attachment theory, originally developed by psychologist John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth and others, proposes that the quality of our earliest relationships, particularly with our primary caregivers, creates an internal working model of relationships that we carry into adulthood. This model shapes how we approach intimacy, how we handle conflict, how we respond to separation, and how we interpret the behavior of the people we love. There are generally 4 attachment styles identified by researchers. Secure attachment, which develops when caregivers are consistently responsive and available, produces adults who are comfortable with intimacy, confident in their worthiness of love, and capable of navigating the inevitable tensions of close relationships with flexibility and grace. Anxious attachment, which develops when caregivers are inconsistent, sometimes warm and available, sometimes distant or distracted, produces adults who crave closeness but fear abandonment, who are hypervigilant to signs of rejection, and who may become clingy, demanding, or emotionally volatile in relationships. Avoidant attachment, which develops when caregivers are emotionally distant or dismissive, produces adults who value independence above all else, who are uncomfortable with vulnerability, and who tend to withdraw from emotional closeness, sometimes appearing cold or indifferent even when they deeply care. And disorganized attachment, which develops in environments of trauma, abuse, or severe neglect, produces adults who oscillate between desperately seeking closeness and fearfully pushing it away, caught in an agonizing contradiction between the desire for connection and the expectation that connection will lead to pain. Here is the fact that makes attachment theory so powerful and so unsettling. Most people are unaware of their own attachment style. They do not recognize the patterns that govern their romantic relationships, their friendships, their reactions to conflict. They experience their emotional responses as natural and inevitable, as simply the way love feels, without realizing that those responses are the product of a template laid down in the first years of life. The anxious person who checks their partner's phone for evidence of betrayal does not think of themselves as enacting a childhood pattern. They think they are responding to a legitimate threat. The avoidant person who shuts down during an argument does not think of themselves as reenacting the emotional distance of an unavailable parent. They think they are being rational, but here is the hopeful counterpoint. Attachment styles, like personality traits, are not permanent. They can shift over time, particularly in the context of secure, loving relationships. A person with an anxious attachment style who partners with a consistently responsive, emotionally available partner can gradually develop what researchers call earned security, a sense of trust and safety that was absent in childhood but that can be cultivated in adulthood. The process is not quick, it is not easy, but it is possible. And this possibility, the possibility that we are not forever trapped by the emotional patterns of our earliest years, is one of the most redemptive findings in all of psychology. Now let us take an unexpected turn and talk about something that influences personality in ways that are only beginning to be understood, the microbiome. Inside your gut, there are trillions of bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms, a thriving ecosystem collectively known as the gut microbiome. For a long time, scientists viewed these organisms as mere passengers, playing a role in digestion but otherwise irrelevant to the brain and behavior. That view has been dramatically overturned in recent years. Research in the emerging field of psychobiotics has revealed that the gut microbiome communicates directly with the brain through the vagus nerve, through immune signaling, and through the production of neurotransmitters. Astonishingly, about 90% of the body's serotonin, a neurotransmitter closely linked to mood, anxiety, and emotional regulation, is produced not in the brain but in the gut. The composition of your gut microbiome can influence how anxious you feel, how well you sleep, how strongly you respond to stress, and even how sociable you are. Animal studies have provided some of the most dramatic evidence. Germ-free mice raised in sterile environments with no gut bacteria, display markedly different behavioral profiles compared to conventionally raised mice. They are more anxious, less exploratory, and less socially engaged. When researchers transplanted gut bacteria from bold, adventurous mice into the germ-free mice, the recipients became bolder and more exploratory. When bacteria from anxious mice were transplanted, the recipients became more anxious. The bacteria, it seemed, were not just passengers. They were co-pilots, actively shaping the emotional and behavioral landscape of their hosts. Human research is still in its early stages, but the findings are tantalizing. Studies have found correlations between specific microbial profiles and personality traits like neuroticism and sociability. Clinical trials have shown that certain probiotic strains can reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. The implications are staggering. Part of who you are, part of your personality, your mood, your emotional resilience, may be shaped not just by your genes and your experiences, but by the invisible ecosystem living inside your digestive tract. Let us move now to another surprising influence on personality, birth order. The idea that your position in the family, whether you are the firstborn, the middle child, or the youngest, shapes your personality has been debated for over a century. The most famous proponent of birth order effects was psychologist Alfred Adler, who argued that firstborns tend to be responsible and achievement-oriented, middle children tend to be diplomatic and flexible, and youngest children tend to be creative and rebellious. For decades, the evidence for birth order effects on personality was mixed and controversial. Many large-scale studies found little or no effect. But more recent research, using sophisticated statistical methods and very large samples, has reopened the debate. A landmark study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzed data from over 20,000 individuals and found that birth order had no significant effect on the Big Five personality traits: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, or openness to experience. However, other researchers have argued that birth order effects may be real but context-dependent, visible within families but not between families. In other words, within a given family, the firstborn may indeed be more conscientious than the youngest sibling. But when you compare firstborns from different families with youngest children from different families, the differences vanish. This is because the baseline personality level in each family is set by genetics and shared environment, and birth order effects represent subtle adjustments within that baseline, adjustments that are real in the context of sibling dynamics but too small to detect in large, between family comparisons. The birth order debate also raises a broader question about personality research. How much of what we believe about personality is based on genuine scientific evidence, and how much is based on cultural mythology? The idea that birth order shapes personality is deeply embedded in popular culture. People love to categorize themselves and others based on sibling position. But the scientific evidence, while not dismissing the possibility entirely, suggests that the effects are far smaller and more nuanced than popular belief would suggest. Let us now explore a topic that sits at the fascinating intersection of personality and biology, the relationship between personality and the brain. Modern neuroimaging techniques, particularly functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, have allowed researchers to peer inside the living human brain and identify neural structures and activity patterns associated with different personality traits. Extroversion, for example, has been linked to greater activity in the brain's reward circuitry, particularly the ventral striatum and the orbitofrontal cortex. When extroverts anticipate a pleasurable experience, a social gathering, a delicious meal, a financial gain, these regions light up with heightened activity compared to introverts. This finding aligns with the theory that extroversion is fundamentally about reward sensitivity. Extroverts do not just behave differently, they experience reward differently. The neurochemical cocktail released in response to positive stimuli is simply more potent in extroverted brains. Neuroticism, by contrast, has been associated with heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, and with altered connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for emotional regulation. In highly neurotic individuals, the amygdala fires more readily and more intensely in response to potential threats, and the prefrontal cortex is less effective at dampening the alarm signal. This creates a brain that is, in essence, constantly scanning for danger and struggling to turn off the alarm once it has been triggered. Conscientiousness has been linked to the structure and function of the prefrontal cortex, the brain region most closely associated with planning, decision-making, and impulse control. Individuals high in conscientiousness tend to have greater prefrontal cortical volume and more efficient prefrontal activity, which supports their ability to set goals, resist temptation, and maintain focus over extended periods. These neural correlates do not mean that personality is purely a product of brain structure. The relationship between brain and personality is bidirectional. Experience shapes the brain just as the brain shapes experience. A person who spends decades practicing mindfulness meditation may develop greater prefrontal control and reduced amygdala reactivity, effectively changing their neural profile in ways that align with increased emotional stability and reduced neuroticism. The brain is not a fixed machine. It is a living, adapting organ, continually rewiring itself in response to the demands of the environment and the choices of the individual. Now let us consider something that most people have never thought about but that profoundly influences personality expression: the time of day. Research on chronotype, the biological tendency to be a morning person or an evening person, has revealed that personality traits fluctuate predictably across the 24-hour cycle. Morning people, or larks, tend to score higher on conscientiousness and agreeableness. Evening people, or owls, tend to score higher on openness to experience and extroversion. But here is the more intriguing finding. Regardless of chronotype, all people show systematic changes in personality-related behavior across the day. Most individuals are more agreeable and more conscientious in the morning, when cognitive resources are fresh and self-regulation is strong. As the day progresses and mental fatigue accumulates, people become more impulsive, more irritable, and more likely to act on their immediate desires rather than their long-term goals. This is why so many arguments happen in the evening. This is why so many diets are broken after dinner. This is why late-night decisions often look different in the light of morning. The person you are at 8 in the morning is not quite the same person you are at 11 at night, and the difference is not trivial. Let us continue our exploration of the hidden forces shaping personality by turning to something that might seem entirely unrelated: the weather. It sounds almost absurd to suggest that weather could influence personality, but the evidence, while subtle, is real. Research on seasonal patterns in mood and behavior has shown that exposure to sunlight, temperature, and barometric pressure all influence emotional states, and emotional states over time can shape the development and expression of personality traits. Seasonal affective disorder, a form of depression triggered by reduced sunlight during winter months, is the most well-known example of weather's influence on psychology. But even outside the clinical realm, studies have found that people born during certain seasons show slight but detectable differences in temperament. One large-scale study found that individuals born in spring and summer were more likely to score higher on measures of positive affect and were slightly less likely to develop mood disorders than those born in autumn and winter. The mechanisms are not fully understood, but they may involve the effects of maternal vitamin D levels, prenatal light exposure, and the timing of critical periods in fetal brain development. Now, it is important to emphasize that these seasonal effects are small. They are statistical tendencies observed across populations, not deterministic forces that dictate individual outcomes. Your birth month does not define your personality. But the finding that something as impersonal and universal as the season of your birth can leave a detectable trace on your psychological makeup speaks to the extraordinary sensitivity of the developing human brain and the myriad forces, both obvious and hidden, that contribute to the making of a person. Let us now talk about one of the most fascinating and least understood aspects of personality: the dark triad. In personality psychology, the dark triad refers to three socially aversive personality traits that often co-occur: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These are not clinical diagnoses. They are dimensions of personality that exist on a continuum, and every person possesses some degree of each. Narcissism, in the personality trait sense, involves grandiosity, a sense of entitlement, and a craving for admiration. Individuals high in narcissism tend to overestimate their abilities, seek the spotlight, and react with anger or contempt when they feel undervalued. Machiavellianism involves strategic manipulation, emotional detachment, and a cynical view of human nature. Machiavellian individuals see relationships as transactions, view people as tools, and are willing to deceive and exploit others to achieve their goals. Psychopathy involves callousness, impulsivity, and a lack of empathy or remorse. Psychopathic individuals can harm others without guilt, take risks without anxiety, and charm without genuine connection. Here is what makes the dark triad so surprising and so important. These traits are not rare. They are not confined to criminals, dictators, or the characters of thriller novels. They exist in your office, in your family, in your social circle. Research suggests that moderate levels of dark triad traits can actually confer social and professional advantages. Narcissistic individuals often make strong first impressions. Machiavellian individuals are skilled negotiators. Psychopathic individuals can remain calm under pressure and make difficult decisions without being paralyzed by emotion. But the advantages of dark triad traits tend to be short-term. Over the long run, individuals high in these traits tend to leave a trail of damaged relationships, broken trust, and institutional dysfunction. They may rise quickly, but they often fall hard. Their success is built on a foundation of exploitation that eventually collapses when others recognize the pattern and withdraw their support. There is also a newer construct gaining attention in personality research: the dark tetrad, which adds everyday sadism to the original three traits. Everyday sadism refers to the tendency to enjoy the suffering of others, not in the extreme criminal sense, but in the subtle, ordinary ways that manifest in internet trolling, aggressive humor, and the quiet pleasure some people take in another person's misfortune. Research has shown that everyday sadism is a distinct trait, not fully captured by the other three dark traits, and that it is more common than most people would like to believe. Let us now shift to a topic that connects personality to one of the most important domains of human life: work. The relationship between personality and career success has been extensively studied, and the findings are both intuitive and surprising. As mentioned earlier, conscientiousness is the strongest personality predictor of job performance across virtually all occupations. But the other big five traits matter too, and their importance depends on the nature of the job. Extroversion predicts success in sales, management, and other roles that require high levels of social interaction and assertiveness. Agreeableness predicts success in teamwork, customer service, and caring professions, but it can actually be a disadvantage in highly competitive, adversarial environments where toughness and self-advocacy are rewarded. Openness to experience predicts success in creative fields, in roles that require innovation and adaptability, and in academic and scientific careers that reward intellectual curiosity. Neuroticism, as you might expect, generally predicts poorer job performance, but it can be an asset in roles that require vigilance, attention to detail, and the detection of potential problems such as quality control, safety inspection, and risk management. Here is a fact about personality and work that challenges a deeply held cultural assumption. Many people believe that passion is the key to career success, that if you find work you love, the motivation and performance will follow naturally. But research suggests that conscientiousness, not passion, is the more reliable predictor of professional achievement. Passionate but undisciplined individuals often struggle to translate their enthusiasm into sustained effort. Conscientious individuals, even when they are not passionately in love with their work, tend to perform at high levels because they are organized, dependable, and committed to doing things well. Passion without discipline burns bright and fades quickly. Discipline without passion may not be thrilling, but it builds careers, reputations, and legacies. Now let us explore the relationship between personality and health, a relationship that is deeper and more consequential than most people realize. We have already mentioned that conscientiousness predicts longevity, but the connections between personality and health extend far beyond this single finding. Neuroticism is associated with a higher risk of cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders, and chronic pain conditions. This is not simply because neurotic individuals are more likely to report symptoms, though they are. It is because chronic negative emotion generates chronic physiological stress, which over time damages the cardiovascular system, suppresses immune function, and promotes inflammation. The body does not distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. When the brain signals danger, whether in response to a genuine crisis or an anxious fantasy, the body responds with the same cascade of stress hormones, the same elevation in heart rate and blood pressure, the same suppression of immune activity. Over years and decades, this chronic activation takes a measurable toll. Hostility, a facet of low agreeableness, is one of the strongest personality predictors of heart disease. Hostile individuals tend to experience frequent anger, distrust, and interpersonal conflict, all of which elevate cardiovascular risk. The famous Type A personality, originally described as competitive, impatient, and driven, was initially thought to predict heart disease as a whole. But subsequent research clarified that it is not the ambition or the time urgency that is dangerous. It is the hostility. Ambitious, hardworking individuals who are warm and trusting do not show elevated cardiovascular risk. Ambitious, hardworking individuals who are cynical, suspicious, and quick to anger do. Optimism, a trait closely related to low neuroticism and high extroversion, has been consistently linked to better health outcomes. Optimistic individuals recover faster from surgery, have stronger immune responses, and live longer on average than their pessimistic counterparts. The mechanisms are both behavioral and biological. Optimists are more likely to engage in healthy behaviors, exercise, balanced diet, regular medical checkups, because they believe that their actions can make a difference. And their positive emotional states generate physiological benefits, including lower cortisol levels, reduced inflammation, and more efficient cardiovascular function. But here is an important caveat. Extreme optimism, what researchers call unrealistic optimism, can be dangerous. Individuals who believe that bad things will never happen to them may fail to take necessary precautions. They may ignore symptoms, skip screenings, and underestimate genuine risks. The healthiest personality profile, it turns out, is not one of boundless positivity, but one of realistic optimism, a genuine belief that things will generally work out, tempered by an honest assessment of risks and a willingness to take appropriate action. Let us now turn to a question that has captivated researchers and laypeople alike. Are there fundamental personality differences between men and women? The answer, like everything in personality science, is more nuanced than popular discourse suggests. On average, across large populations, women tend to score higher than men on agreeableness and neuroticism. They tend to report more warmth, more empathy, more anxiety, and more emotional sensitivity. Men, on average, tend to score higher on assertiveness, a facet of extroversion, and slightly higher on openness to ideas, while women score higher on openness to feelings and aesthetics. But here is the crucial point that is often lost in the headlines. These are average differences across populations, and the overlap between men and women on every personality dimension is enormous. The most agreeable man is far more agreeable than the least agreeable woman. The most neurotic man is far more neurotic than the least neurotic woman. The distributions overlap so extensively that knowing a person's sex tells you very little about their individual personality. You would be wrong more often than right if you tried to predict a specific individual's personality based solely on whether they are male or female. There is an additional finding that complicates the picture further, a finding known as the gender equality paradox. Researchers have consistently found that sex differences in personality are larger, not smaller, in countries with greater gender equality. In societies where men and women have the most freedom to make their own choices, where economic and educational barriers are lowest, the personality differences between the sexes tend to be most pronounced. This counterintuitive finding suggests that as external constraints are removed, innate biological predispositions may express themselves more fully. When people are free to be who they truly are, the natural variation between the sexes becomes more visible, not less. This finding does not mean that sex differences in personality are entirely biological, nor does it mean that social and cultural forces are irrelevant. It means that the relationship between biology, culture, and personality is far more complex than any simple narrative, whether from the nature camp or the nurture camp, can capture. The truth lies in the interaction, in the dynamic interplay between genetic predispositions and social contexts, between hormones and expectations, between brain structure and lived experience. Now let us explore something deeply personal and often misunderstood: the relationship between personality and creativity. Creativity is one of the most valued human capacities, and its relationship to personality has been the subject of intense study. The personality trait most consistently associated with creativity is openness to experience, the dimension of the Big Five that encompasses intellectual curiosity, aesthetic sensitivity, imaginative thinking, and a preference for novelty and variety. Individuals high in openness are more likely to engage in creative activities, to produce creative work, and to be recognized as creative by their peers. They are more comfortable with ambiguity, more willing to entertain unconventional ideas, and more attuned to the subtle connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. Their minds are like loosely woven nets, casting wide, catching unexpected combinations, and finding patterns that more tightly structured minds might miss. But creativity is not solely the province of the open-minded. Research has also linked creativity to certain aspects of neuroticism, particularly the tendency toward introspection and emotional intensity. Many of the world's most celebrated artists, writers, and musicians have been individuals who experienced the world with painful vividness, who felt emotions more deeply than average, and who channeled that intensity into creative expression. The romantic image of the tortured artist is not entirely a myth. There's a genuine, documented association between creative achievement and emotional suffering, though it is important to note that suffering is neither necessary nor sufficient for creativity. There is also a connection between creativity and a cognitive style known as latent inhibition. Latent inhibition is the brain's tendency to filter out stimuli that have previously been experienced as irrelevant. Most people have strong latent inhibition. They are very good at ignoring background noise, at filtering out unimportant information, at focusing on what is immediately relevant. This is an adaptive and useful cognitive function. But individuals with reduced latent inhibition, those whose brains are less effective at filtering out previously irrelevant stimuli, are flooded with a richer, more varied stream of sensory and cognitive information. This can be overwhelming. In individuals with low cognitive resources, reduced latent inhibition is associated with psychosis and cognitive disorganization. But in individuals with high intelligence and strong executive function, reduced latent inhibition is associated with enhanced creativity. These individuals can manage the flood of information, find unexpected connections within it, and transform the raw chaos of experience into creative insight. This brings us to a broader point about personality and mental health. There is a well-documented association between certain personality traits and certain psychiatric disorders. High neuroticism is a risk factor for depression and anxiety disorders. Low agreeableness and low conscientiousness are risk factors for antisocial personality disorder. Extreme introversion combined with social anxiety can contribute to avoidant personality disorder. High openness to experience in extreme forms can shade into the odd beliefs and unusual perceptual experiences associated with schizotypal personality disorder. But these associations do not mean that personality traits are disorders. They mean that the same dimensions of variation that produce the rich tapestry of normal human personality, when pushed to their extremes and combined with adverse circumstances, can cross over into territory that causes significant suffering and impairment. The line between normal personality variation and personality disorder is not a bright, clear boundary. It is a gradient, a slow transition from adaptive to maladaptive, from eccentric to dysfunctional, from intense to overwhelming. Let us now discuss something that connects personality to the digital age in ways that most people find astonishing. The fact that your personality can be accurately predicted from your digital footprint. Researchers have demonstrated that algorithms analyzing Facebook likes, Twitter posts, Spotify playlists, and smartphone usage patterns can predict an individual's big five personality traits with a degree of accuracy that rivals or exceeds the accuracy of judgments made by the person's close friends and family members. In one landmark study, a computer model analyzing just 10 Facebook likes could predict a person's personality more accurately than a work colleague. With 70 likes, it outperformed a friend. With 150 likes, it outperformed a family member. And with 300 likes, it outperformed a spouse. This is a breathtaking finding. It means that the digital traces you leave behind, the music you listen to, the pages you follow, the posts you like, the words you use in your messages, contain more personality-relevant information than the impressions of the people who know you best. The implications are profound and to many people deeply unsettling. If algorithms can read your personality from your digital behavior, then corporations, governments, and political campaigns can target you with messages tailored to your specific psychological profile. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It has already happened. The Cambridge Analytica scandal revealed that psychographic profiling, personality-based targeting, was used to influence voter behavior in major elections around the world. Your personality, translated into data, became a tool of persuasion. This raises urgent questions about privacy, consent, and the ethics of psychological profiling in the digital age, but it also raises a deeper question about self-knowledge. If a machine can know your personality better than your spouse does, what does that say about the limits of human self-understanding? What does it say about the vast, unconscious dimensions of personality that operate below the threshold of awareness? Let us continue by exploring the relationship between personality and language. The words you use, not just what you say, but how you say it, are a surprisingly reliable window into your personality. Researchers in the field of computational linguistics have analyzed millions of written texts and found consistent associations between word usage and personality traits. Extroverts use more positive emotion words, more social words, and more words related to activities and events. Introverts use more words related to solitary activities, more analytical language, and more hedging and qualification. Neurotic individuals use more negative emotion words, more first-person singular pronouns, I, me, my, and more words related to bodily sensations and health concerns. Conscientious individuals use more achievement-related words, more words related to work and organization, and fewer profanity and slang terms. Open individuals use more complex vocabulary, more abstract language, and more words related to art, culture, and ideas. These patterns are not limited to formal writing. They appear in emails, text messages, social media posts, and even casual conversation. The language you use is, in a very real sense, a projection of your personality, a continuous, unconscious broadcast of who you are, transmitted in every sentence you speak or write. There is an even more fascinating layer to this story. The way you use function words, the small, seemingly insignificant words like pronouns, prepositions, articles, and conjunctions, is a more reliable indicator of personality than your use of content words. Content words carry the meaning of what you are saying. Function words carry the style of how you are saying it, and style, it turns out, is deeply personal. The way you structure a sentence, the way you connect ideas, the way you position yourself in relation to your listener, these are the linguistic fingerprints of personality, visible to sophisticated analysis but invisible to the naked ear. Now let us delve into a topic that touches every human life but that few people connect to personality: sleep. The relationship between personality and sleep is bidirectional and powerful. Personality traits influence sleep habits, and sleep habits, in turn, influence personality expression. Conscientious individuals tend to have better sleep hygiene. They maintain regular bedtimes, avoid stimulants before sleep, and create environments conducive to rest. As a result, they tend to report better sleep quality and fewer sleep disturbances. Neurotic individuals, by contrast, tend to have poorer sleep. They lie awake ruminating, they experience more nightmares, and they are more likely to develop insomnia. The anxious mind does not turn off at bedtime. It continues its vigilant scanning, its catastrophic forecasting, its restless rehearsal of worst-case scenarios long into the night. Extroversion has been linked to a preference for later bedtimes and later wake times, the owl chronotype, while introversion has been associated with earlier bedtimes and earlier wake times. This is not just a matter of social preference. It reflects genuine biological differences in circadian rhythm regulation. Extroverted brains tend to have later peaks in alertness and cognitive performance, while introverted brains peak earlier in the day. Here is the fact about sleep and personality that should concern everyone. Sleep deprivation, which affects a staggering proportion of the modern population, temporarily but dramatically alters personality expression. After just one night of insufficient sleep, individuals become more neurotic, less agreeable, less conscientious, and more impulsive. Their emotional regulation deteriorates, their patience shrinks, their ability to empathize diminishes. In essence, sleep deprivation strips away the higher-order personality functions, the ones that make us kind, disciplined, and emotionally stable, and exposes the raw, reactive core underneath. Chronic sleep deprivation does not just temporarily alter personality. Over time, it can contribute to lasting changes in emotional regulation, stress reactivity, and interpersonal behavior. People who consistently fail to get adequate sleep may find that they become more irritable, more anxious, and less capable of the patience and warmth that sustain their relationships. They may attribute these changes to aging, to stress, to the pressures of life, without recognizing that the root cause may be as simple and as fixable as getting more sleep. Let us now explore one of the most intriguing frontiers in personality research, the relationship between personality and music preference. You might think that your taste in music is a matter of arbitrary personal preference, shaped by exposure and social influence. And exposure and social influence do play a role, but research has consistently shown that personality traits predict music preferences with surprising accuracy. Individuals high in openness to experience are drawn to complex, novel, and unconventional music, jazz, classical, world music, avant-garde, and experimental genres. They seek out musical experiences that challenge them, that surprise them, that take them to unfamiliar emotional and aesthetic territories. Individuals high in extroversion prefer music that is energetic, rhythmic, and upbeat, pop, dance, hip-hop, and other genres that provide high levels of stimulation and are well suited to social contexts. Individuals high in agreeableness tend to prefer music that is soft, warm, and emotionally positive, acoustic, folk, and smooth genres that convey gentleness and empathy. Individuals high in neuroticism are drawn to music that is intense, emotional, and often melancholic, genres that mirror and validate their inner emotional landscape. And conscientious individuals tend to prefer music that is structured, predictable, and conventional, genres with clear melodies, straightforward lyrics, and familiar forms. These preferences are not superficial. They reflect deep-seated psychological needs. We are drawn to music that resonates with our temperament, that provides the emotional and sensory experience our personality craves. An open-minded person listening to experimental jazz is not just hearing music. They are feeding their need for novelty, for complexity, for the thrill of encountering something they have never heard before. An extroverted person dancing to an infectious pop song is not just having fun. They are satisfying their drive for stimulation, for energy, for the joyful connection of shared rhythm. As we approach the midpoint of this documentary, let us pause and reflect on something that underlies everything we have discussed so far. Personality is not a single thing. It is not a type, a label, or a category. It is a multidimensional, dynamic, deeply embedded aspect of human biology and experience that touches every domain of life, from the genes that build your brain to the bacteria that inhabit your gut, from the words you use in your text messages to the music you play on your commute, from the way you fall asleep at night to the way you fall in love. And yet, for all its complexity, personality has a remarkable coherence. Despite all the forces that shape and reshape it, genetics, experience, culture, health, relationships, age, even the seasons, there is a thread of continuity that runs through each human life. The shy child who becomes a thoughtful adult, the bold toddler who grows into a daring entrepreneur, the anxious teenager who matures into a cautious but capable professional. The core of who you are, not the details, but the broad strokes, persists across decades, providing a sense of identity, a feeling of continuity, a recognition that the person you were at 10 and the person you are at 50 share something essential and enduring. This continuity is not a cage, it is a compass. It points you toward the environments, the relationships, the activities, and the challenges that resonate with your nature. And understanding that compass, understanding your own personality, with all its strengths and vulnerabilities, its gifts and its shadows, is one of the most powerful forms of self-knowledge available to any human being. Let us continue our journey by exploring how personality is perceived by others, and how those perceptions shape the world we inhabit. There is a phenomenon in social psychology known as the lens model, which describes how people form impressions of others' personalities. According to this model, personality is expressed through a variety of cues: facial expressions, body language, clothing, speech patterns, the tidiness of one's living space, the music on one's playlist, and observers use these cues to form judgments about what a person is like. Here is the remarkable finding: people are surprisingly accurate at judging strangers' personalities from minimal information. Studies have shown that brief exposure to a person, as little as a few seconds of video, A glance at a photograph or a quick tour of their bedroom provides enough information for observers to make personality judgments that agree substantially with the person's own self-report and with the reports of their close friends. This accuracy is not perfect, and it varies by trait. Extroversion is the easiest trait for strangers to judge accurately, while neuroticism is the hardest, but it is consistently better than chance. How is this possible? How can a stranger with no personal history, no shared experiences, no intimate conversations form an accurate impression of your personality in seconds? The answer lies in the richness and redundancy of personality cues. Personality is not hidden, it leaks. It leaks through the way you walk, the way you shake hands, the way you decorate your office, the way you arrange your bookshelf. Every choice you make, every habit you maintain, every object you surround yourself with is a clue, a small piece of the vast puzzle of who you are. And human brains, evolved over millions of years to navigate complex social environments, are exquisitely attuned to these clues. But accuracy in personality perception is not the whole story. There's also the phenomenon of personality stereotyping, the tendency to attribute personality traits to others based on superficial characteristics like physical appearance, ethnicity, gender, or occupation. These stereotypes are often inaccurate and sometimes harmful. Research has shown, for example, that people tend to judge physically attractive individuals as more extroverted, more agreeable, and more emotionally stable than less attractive individuals, even when objective measures of personality show no such relationship. The halo effect, the tendency for a positive impression in one domain to spill over into other domains, distorts personality perception, leading us to see warmth, competence, and integrity in those we find attractive, and to underestimate these qualities in those we do not. Let us now consider the relationship between personality and friendship, a topic that is both scientifically rich and deeply human. Research consistently shows that friends tend to be more similar in personality than would be expected by chance. This phenomenon, known as homophily, reflects the natural tendency to seek out and maintain relationships with people who share our values, interests, and temperamental style. Extroverts befriend extroverts. Agreeable people befriend agreeable people. Open-minded individuals cluster together, drawn by shared curiosity and intellectual stimulation. But the picture is not as simple as birds of a feather flock together. Research also suggests that certain personality combinations are more satisfying than perfect similarity. In close friendships, complementarity, where each friend provides what the other lacks, can be as important as similarity. An introverted person may deeply value a more extroverted friend who draws them into social experiences they would not seek on their own. A highly neurotic individual may find comfort and stability in a calm, emotionally steady friend who provides reassurance and perspective. The key factor, research suggests, is not whether friends are similar or complementary, but whether the friendship provides a sense of felt understanding, the subjective feeling that the other person truly knows and accepts you. This feeling of being understood is one of the most powerful predictors of friendship satisfaction, and it depends less on actual personality similarity than on the quality of communication, the depth of self-disclosure, and the willingness of each friend to engage with the other's inner world. Let us now talk about something that many people carry with them throughout their lives without fully understanding it: the relationship between personality and self-esteem. Self-esteem, the global evaluation you make of your own worth, is closely linked to personality traits, particularly neuroticism and extroversion. Individuals high in neuroticism tend to have lower self-esteem. Their chronic tendency toward negative emotion, self-criticism, and social comparison makes it difficult to maintain a stable, positive view of themselves. They are more sensitive to failure, more affected by rejection, and more likely to interpret ambiguous social cues as evidence of their own inadequacy. The neurotic mind is in many ways a hostile internal environment, one that constantly generates doubt, guilt, and self-blame. Individuals high in extroversion, by contrast, tend to have higher self-esteem. Their sensitivity to reward, their social confidence, and their tendency to experience frequent positive emotions all contribute to a more stable and positive self-image. Extroverts are more likely to seek out social feedback, and in most social contexts, the feedback they receive is positive, reinforcing their sense of worth and competence. But here's a nuance that complicates the picture. High self-esteem is not always healthy. Research has distinguished between secure self-esteem, which is stable, based on genuine self-knowledge and relatively independent of external validation, and fragile self-esteem, which is unstable, defensive, and heavily dependent on the approval of others. Individuals with fragile high self-esteem may appear confident on the surface, but they are internally brittle, easily threatened by criticism, and prone to aggressive or dismissive reactions when their self-image is challenged. Narcissistic individuals often fit this profile, outwardly grandiose, inwardly insecure, and perpetually scanning the social environment for evidence that they are admired and respected. The healthiest self-esteem, research suggests, is secure and moderately high, not inflated, not fragile, but grounded in an honest assessment of one's strengths and limitations. This kind of self-esteem is closely associated with emotional stability, strong relationships, and a deep sense of purpose and meaning. It is not the product of constant self-affirmation or relentless positive thinking. It is the product of genuine self-knowledge, authentic relationships, and a life aligned with one's core values. As we continue, let us explore the way personality shapes one of the most fundamental human experiences, the experience of time. Different personality types experience time in fundamentally different ways, and these differences have profound consequences for behavior, decision-making, and well-being. Philip Zimbardo, the psychologist famous for the Stanford Prison Experiment, developed a framework called time perspective theory, which identifies several orientations toward time. Some people are past-oriented. They are heavily influenced by memories, traditions, and previous experiences. Within this category, some are past positive, deriving warmth and meaning from nostalgic reflection, while others are past negative, haunted by regrets, traumas, and the persistent sting of old wounds. Some people are present-oriented. They live in the moment, focused on immediate sensory and emotional experience. Present hedonistic individuals seek pleasure, excitement, and novelty, often at the expense of long-term planning. Present fatalistic individuals feel helpless, believing that life is controlled by external forces and that planning is futile. And some people are future-oriented. They focus on goals, plans, and anticipated outcomes, willingly sacrificing present pleasure for future rewards. Future-oriented individuals tend to be more conscientious, more successful academically and professionally, and healthier overall. But they may also struggle to enjoy the present moment, to relax, to savor the simple pleasures of being alive right now. Here is the connection to personality. Conscientiousness is strongly associated with a future time perspective. Extroversion and low conscientiousness are associated with a present hedonistic time perspective. Neuroticism is associated with a past negative time perspective. And the most psychologically healthy individuals, Zimbardo argues, are those who have a balanced time perspective, a flexible ability to draw on past experiences, enjoy present moments, and plan for the future as the situation demands. This framework has practical implications. If you are a person who is trapped in regret, replaying old failures and missed opportunities, you may be suffering from a past negative time perspective that is draining your energy and darkening your mood. If you are a person who is constantly planning and never present, you may be sacrificing the richness of lived experience on the altar of future achievement. Understanding your own time perspective and learning to adjust it can shift the quality of your daily experience in profound ways. Let us now bring this first part of our journey toward its conclusion by discussing a fact about personality that many people find both humbling and liberating. You are not just oneself. The notion that each person possesses a single, unified personality is a useful fiction, a simplification that helps us navigate the social world. But the reality is far more fluid. Every person contains multitudes. You are different with your parents than with your friends. You are different at work than at home. You are different when you are afraid than when you are safe. You are different when you are in love than when you are heartbroken. These variations are not masks. They are not performances. They are genuine expressions of different facets of a complex, multidimensional personality, activated by different contexts, different relationships, and different emotional states. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon under the heading of personality variability or within-person variation. Research shows that the typical person's behavior fluctuates substantially from situation to situation and from day to day. An individual who is usually agreeable may become hostile under extreme stress. An individual who is usually introverted may become animated and talkative in the company of close, trusted friends. These fluctuations are not signs of inconsistency or inauthenticity. They are signs of adaptability, the remarkable human capacity to adjust behavior in response to the shifting demands of the environment. But there are stable patterns within the variability. Each person has a characteristic way of varying. Some people become more extroverted in social situations and more introverted when alone, and this pattern is consistent and predictable for that individual. Some people become more agreeable with strangers and more disagreeable with family, and this, too, is a stable aspect of their personality. The pattern of variation is itself a personality trait, a meta-trait that captures not just who you are on average, but how you change across the landscape of your life. This brings us to a deep and somewhat unsettling truth. You will never fully know your own personality. The self is too vast, too context-dependent, too deeply embedded in the unconscious architecture of the brain to be fully captured by conscious self-reflection. You can observe your behavior, solicit feedback from others, take personality assessments, and engage in deep introspection, and all of these activities will yield genuine insights. But there will always be dimensions of your personality that remain hidden from your own view, habits you do not notice, patterns you cannot see, biases you cannot detect, motivations you do not acknowledge. This is not a failure, it is a feature. The human personality is designed to operate largely below the level of conscious awareness, running its complex programs in the background while the conscious mind attends to the immediate tasks of living. The goal of self-knowledge is not to achieve total transparency. That is impossible. The goal is to achieve enough understanding to make wise choices, to build meaningful relationships, to navigate the inevitable challenges of a human life with grace and resilience. And with that, we pause. We have traveled through the biology of temperament, the genetics of personality, the architecture of attachment, the chemistry of the gut, the rhythms of sleep, the language of the unconscious, and the multifaceted nature of the self. We have seen that personality is not a simple label or a fixed type, but a living, breathing, evolving system, shaped by forces both visible and invisible, both ancient and immediate. In the second part of this documentary, we will go even deeper. We will explore how personality shapes romantic relationships, how it influences political beliefs, how it changes in response to trauma, how it differs across cultures, and how the emerging science of personality is opening new frontiers in medicine, education, and artificial intelligence. We will confront the darkest aspects of personality and celebrate the brightest. And we will arrive at a destination that is, in the end, the only destination that truly matters, a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. But we are only halfway through. The landscape ahead is even more extraordinary. In this second part, we will explore how personality shapes the most intimate corners of your life, your romantic relationships, your political convictions, your spiritual experiences, your response to trauma, and your confrontation with mortality. We will cross cultural boundaries and ask whether personality is universal or culturally constructed. We will examine how personality changes across the lifespan and whether it is possible to deliberately reshape who you are. We will look at the emerging frontiers of personality science, from artificial intelligence to personalized medicine, and we will confront the deepest question of all. What does it mean to have a personality, and why does it matter? Let us begin with love. Romantic relationships are, for most people, the arena where personality matters most and where its influence is felt most acutely. The person you choose to share your life with, the way you behave within that relationship, the conflicts you have, the way you repair after those conflicts, the depth of intimacy you achieve, the likelihood that the relationship will endure, all of these are profoundly shaped by personality. Research on personality and romantic relationships has produced a finding that surprises many people. The single strongest personality predictor of relationship dissatisfaction is not incompatibility between partners. It is neuroticism, specifically the neuroticism of either partner. Individuals high in neuroticism bring a chronic undercurrent of anxiety, irritability, and emotional reactivity into their relationships. They are more likely to interpret ambiguous behavior as threatening, more likely to escalate minor disagreements into major conflicts, and more likely to engage in destructive communication patterns, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and withdrawal that erode the foundation of intimacy over time. The partner of a highly neurotic individual often finds themselves walking on eggshells, constantly managing the other person's emotional state, and gradually withdrawing their own vulnerability in self-protection. Over months and years, this dynamic can hollow out a relationship from the inside, leaving the external structure intact but the internal warmth and connection extinguished. But neuroticism is not a death sentence for love. Research has also shown that the negative effects of neuroticism on relationships can be substantially buffered by two factors: the partner's agreeableness and the quality of communication within the relationship. When a neurotic individual is paired with a patient, warm, emotionally generous partner, someone high in agreeableness, the neurotic partner's anxiety is soothed rather than amplified. And when couples develop strong communication skills, the ability to express needs without blame, to listen without defensiveness, to repair after ruptures, the chronic stress generated by neuroticism can be managed rather than allowed to accumulate. Now here is a finding about romantic attraction that overturns one of the most cherished beliefs in popular culture, the idea that opposites attract. The scientific evidence overwhelmingly supports the opposite conclusion. Romantic relationships, similarity attracts. People tend to be drawn to partners who share their personality traits, their values, their attitudes, and their level of intelligence. This is not just a matter of initial attraction, it is a predictor of long-term relationship success. Couples who are similar in personality report higher satisfaction, experience fewer conflicts, and are less likely to divorce than couples who are dissimilar. The reasons for this are both practical and psychological. Similar partners understand each other more easily. They share a common language for interpreting the world. They are more likely to agree on how to spend leisure time, how to manage money, how to raise children, and how to handle conflict. They validate each other's way of being in the world, which provides a deep and sustaining sense of being known and accepted. But there is one exception to the similarity rule that is worth noting. Research suggests that complementarity in dominance, one partner being more assertive and the other more deferential, can enhance relationship satisfaction, at least in some cultural contexts. This is not about one partner being controlling and the other submissive. It is about a natural division of leadership that reduces conflict and allows decisions to be made efficiently. When both partners are highly dominant, power struggles can be frequent and exhausting. When both are highly deferential, decisions can go unmade and frustrations can simmer beneath the surface. A moderate degree of complementarity and assertiveness can create a smooth, functional dynamic, though this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Let us now explore a dimension of personality that is rarely discussed in polite conversation, but that profoundly influences behavior in romantic and sexual relationships: sociosexuality. Sociosexuality refers to an individual's willingness to engage in sexual activity outside of committed relationships, a dimension that ranges from restricted, where individuals prefer sex within the context of emotional commitment, to unrestricted, where individuals are comfortable with casual sexual encounters and may separate sexual desire from emotional attachment. Sociosexuality is a genuine personality dimension. It is stable over time, partially heritable, and associated with other personality traits. Unrestricted sociosexuality is correlated with extroversion, openness to experience, and lower agreeableness. Restricted sociosexuality is correlated with conscientiousness, agreeableness, and a preference for long-term relationship investment. Here is what makes this dimension so interesting from an evolutionary perspective. Both strategies, restricted and unrestricted, have been maintained across human populations because both confer advantages under different environmental conditions. In stable, resource-rich environments whereby parental care is essential for offspring survival, restricted sociosexuality is advantageous. It promotes pair bonding, paternal investment, and cooperative child rearing. In unstable, unpredictable environments where the future is uncertain, unrestricted sociosexuality can be advantageous. It maximizes reproductive opportunities and genetic diversity. This does not mean that sociosexuality is purely a product of evolutionary programming. Cultural norms, personal values, religious beliefs, and individual experiences all shape where a person falls on the sociosexual spectrum. But the fact that this dimension is partially heritable and consistently measurable across cultures suggests that it is rooted in genuine biological variation, another thread in the impossibly complex tapestry of human personality. Now let us turn to a topic that has become increasingly contentious in modern discourse: the relationship between personality and political beliefs. This is a subject that provokes strong reactions, and the findings must be interpreted carefully. But the science is clear. Personality traits are significantly correlated with political orientation. The most robust finding is the association between openness to experience and liberal political beliefs. Individuals high in openness, those who are curious, imaginative, unconventional, and comfortable with ambiguity, tend to hold more liberal or progressive political views. They are more supportive of social change, more tolerant of diversity, more skeptical of traditional authority, and more receptive to novel ideas and unfamiliar perspectives. The second most robust finding is the association between conscientiousness and conservative political beliefs. Individuals high in conscientiousness, those who value order, discipline, tradition, and predictability, tend to hold more conservative political views. They are more supportive of established institutions, more respectful of authority and hierarchy, more cautious about rapid social change, and more attuned to the potential costs and unintended consequences of disrupting the status quo. These associations do not mean that personality determines political beliefs in a simple, mechanistic way. Many other factors, education, income, religious upbringing, geographic location, personal experiences, media consumption, influence political orientation. And there are plenty of open-minded conservatives and conscientious liberals. The associations are statistical tendencies observed across large populations, not iron laws that apply to every individual. But the finding is important because it suggests that political disagreements are not purely rational disputes about policy and evidence. They are, at least in part, expressions of deep-seated temperamental differences, differences in how people process uncertainty, how they respond to threat, how they weigh the relative importance of tradition and innovation, stability and change, order and freedom. Understanding this does not resolve political conflicts. But it can foster a degree of empathy and humility, a recognition that the person on the other side of the political divide may not be stupid, ignorant, or malicious, but may simply be experiencing the world through a different temperamental lens. There is a related finding that deserves attention. Research has shown that threat sensitivity, the tendency to perceive and respond to potential dangers, is associated with conservative political views. Individuals who are more sensitive to physical threats, more disgusted by potential contaminants, and more alert to signs of danger in their environment tend to hold more conservative positions on issues related to immigration, national security, law and order, and social change. This does not mean that conservatives are more fearful, a characterization that oversimplifies the data and risks becoming an insult rather than an insight. It means that individual differences in threat processing, differences rooted in brain structure and function, are connected to the psychological foundations of political ideology. Let us now explore how personality interacts with one of the most transformative and often devastating human experiences, trauma. The relationship between personality and trauma is bidirectional. Personality traits influence how a person responds to traumatic events, and traumatic events in turn can alter personality. Not everyone who experiences trauma develops post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, the majority of people exposed to traumatic events do not develop PTSD. They experience acute distress, but they recover, often within weeks or months, and return to their previous level of functioning. This phenomenon, known as resilience, is the norm, not the exception. And personality plays a significant role in determining who is resilient and who is not. Neuroticism is the strongest personality predictor of vulnerability to PTSD. Individuals high in neuroticism are more likely to develop persistent, debilitating post-traumatic symptoms because their emotional processing system is already primed for threat detection and negative emotion. The trauma overwhelms an already overloaded system, flooding it with fear, helplessness, and horror that the brain cannot effectively process or integrate. Extroversion and conscientiousness, by contrast, are associated with greater resilience. Extroverted individuals are more likely to seek social support after a traumatic event, a critical protective factor. Conscientious individuals are more likely to engage in active coping strategies, problem-solving, planning, and seeking professional help, rather than passive strategies like avoidance and denial. But here is the fact about trauma and personality that challenges our usual narrative. While trauma is often framed exclusively as a source of damage and suffering, research has documented a phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth, a positive psychological change that can emerge from the struggle with highly challenging life circumstances. Individuals who experience post-traumatic growth report a deeper appreciation for life, stronger and more meaningful relationships, a greater sense of personal strength, recognition of new possibilities, and spiritual or existential development. Post-traumatic growth is not the same as resilience. Resilience means returning to baseline after a traumatic event. Post-traumatic growth means exceeding that baseline, emerging from trauma not just recovered, but transformed. And personality plays a role here too. Openness to experience is associated with greater post-traumatic growth because open individuals are more willing to explore the meaning of their suffering, to question their assumptions, and to reconstruct their understanding of themselves and the world in the aftermath of crisis. This does not romanticize trauma. Trauma is devastating, and no one should be expected to find a silver lining in their pain. But the existence of post-traumatic growth suggests that the human personality possesses a remarkable capacity for reconstruction, a capacity to take the shattered fragments of a previous worldview and assemble them into something new, something that incorporates the reality of suffering without being destroyed by it. Let us now cross cultural boundaries and ask one of the most fundamental questions in personality science: is personality universal? Do people in every culture, every society, every corner of the globe vary along the same basic dimensions of personality? Or is the very concept of personality a product of a particular cultural tradition, a framework that makes sense in some societies but not others? The evidence strongly supports the universality of basic personality structure. The Big Five personality traits, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, have been identified in studies conducted across dozens of cultures and languages, from industrialized urban societies to small-scale traditional communities. The same 5 dimensions emerge again and again, suggesting that they capture something fundamental about the architecture of human behavioral variation, something that transcends cultural boundaries. But universality of structure does not mean uniformity of expression. While the same basic traits exist in every culture, the average levels of those traits and the ways they are expressed and valued vary considerably from one society to another. Some cultures produce populations that are, on average, more introverted. Some produce populations that are more agreeable. Some value conscientiousness more highly than openness, while others prioritize warmth and social harmony over individual achievement. Here is a finding that illustrates this cultural variation in a particularly striking way. Research comparing personality profiles across dozens of nations has found that people in East Asian countries tend to score lower on extroversion and higher on neuroticism compared to people in Western European and North and South American countries. But these differences do not mean that East Asians are inherently more anxious or less social. They may reflect cultural norms about emotional expression, self-presentation, and the meaning of survey questions. In cultures that value emotional restraint and modesty, individuals may describe themselves as less extroverted and more emotionally sensitive, not because their underlying temperament is different, but because their cultural framework for understanding and reporting personality is different. This raises a profound methodological challenge for cross-cultural personality research. If personality questionnaires are designed within one cultural context and then translated and administered in another, how can researchers be sure they are measuring the same construct? The answer is that they cannot be entirely sure, and this uncertainty has fueled decades of debate. But the convergence of evidence from self-report questionnaires, peer ratings, behavioral observations, and even analysis of personal music and social media preferences suggests that the Big Five, while not perfectly universal, captures something real and important about human nature that exists across cultural boundaries. There is another fascinating cross-cultural finding worth discussing. In some small-scale traditional societies, the Big Five factor structure does not emerge as cleanly as it does in large, industrialized nations. Instead, a simpler 2-factor structure, roughly corresponding to sociality and industriousness, sometimes fits the data better. This may suggest that the 5-factor structure, while rooted in biology, requires a certain level of social complexity and behavioral diversity to fully differentiate. In simpler social environments, with fewer distinct social roles and behavioral niches, the underlying personality dimensions may not have as many opportunities to express themselves in distinct, measurable ways. This finding is a reminder that personality is not a purely internal phenomenon. It is expressed in behavior, and behavior is always situated in a context. The personality traits that matter most, that are most visible and most consequential, depend partly on the demands of the environment. In a small foraging community, the distinction between openness and conscientiousness may be less relevant than the distinction between social cooperativeness and personal industriousness. In a complex, specialized urban society, the full range of personality variation has room to express itself, and the Big Five captures that variation with remarkable precision. Let us now explore a topic that lies at the intersection of personality and the deepest questions of human existence: the relationship between personality and spirituality. Research has consistently found that certain personality traits are associated with greater religiosity and spiritual experience. Agreeableness is one of the strongest predictors of religious involvement. Agreeable individuals are drawn to the communal, prosocial aspects of religious life, and they are more likely to value harmony, compassion, and moral behavior. Conscientiousness is also associated with religiosity, reflecting the value that religious traditions typically place on discipline, duty, and adherence to moral codes. But the most fascinating personality correlate of spiritual experience is not agreeableness or conscientiousness. It is a facet of openness to experience known as absorption, the tendency to become fully immersed in sensory or imaginative experiences, to lose oneself in a sunset, a piece of music, a meditation, or a prayer. Individuals high in absorption are more likely to report mystical experiences, transcendent states, and a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. Their capacity for deep, focused immersion in experience makes them more susceptible to the awe, wonder, and self-transcendence that lie at the heart of spiritual life. Here is a finding that complicates the relationship between personality and religion. While agreeableness and conscientiousness predict conventional religious involvement, attendance at services, participation in religious communities, adherence to established doctrines, openness to experience predicts a different kind of spirituality, one that is personal, eclectic, experiential, and often outside the boundaries of organized religion. Open individuals are more likely to explore alternative spiritual practices, to blend ideas from different traditions, and to seek direct personal experience of the sacred rather than accepting inherited beliefs on faith. They are spiritual seekers rather than religious adherents, pilgrims rather than parishioners. This distinction between institutional religiosity and personal spirituality maps onto a broader personality dynamic. The tension between tradition and exploration, between the comfort of the known and the thrill of the unknown. Both orientations have value. Institutional religion provides community, structure, moral guidance, and a sense of belonging. Personal spirituality provides freedom, flexibility, and the possibility of direct encounter with the transcendent. And personality, in its quiet, persistent way, steers each individual toward the form of spiritual engagement that best fits their temperamental needs. Now let us turn to a subject that touches every human life but that most people prefer not to think about, the relationship between personality and aging. We have already mentioned the maturity principle, the finding that people tend to become more agreeable, more conscientious, and less neurotic as they age. But the story of personality and aging is richer and more nuanced than this general trend suggests. First, personality change in adulthood is not uniform. While the average person becomes more emotionally stable and more socially skilled with age, there is enormous individual variation. Some people change dramatically, others barely change at all, and a minority of individuals change in the opposite direction, becoming more neurotic, less agreeable, or less conscientious as they age. These atypical trajectories are often linked to specific life circumstances, chronic illness, social isolation, traumatic loss, or the erosion of meaningful roles and relationships. Second, personality change accelerates at certain life stages. Adolescence and young adulthood are periods of particularly rapid personality development as individuals navigate the challenges of identity formation, intimate relationships, and career establishment. Middle adulthood is often a period of relative stability, as the personality has consolidated around a set of well-practiced roles and routines. And late adulthood, particularly the periods surrounding retirement and the loss of a spouse, can trigger another wave of personality change, as individuals confront new challenges and redefine their sense of purpose and identity. There is a particularly poignant finding about personality in very late life. Research on individuals in their 80s and 90s has found that personality traits can shift in response to the biological and social changes associated with advanced aging. Extroversion tends to decline as social networks shrink, physical mobility decreases, and opportunities for social engagement diminish. Openness to experience may also decline as cognitive flexibility decreases and the world becomes smaller. These changes are not inevitable, and they are influenced by health, social support, and personal agency. But they remind us that personality, for all its stability and continuity, is ultimately embodied, tied to a physical organism that changes and deteriorates over time. Here is a fact about personality and aging that many people find deeply reassuring. While specific personality traits may shift with age, the overall sense of personal identity, the feeling of being the same person across time, remains remarkably stable for most individuals throughout the lifespan. Even people who have changed substantially in their trait profile over decades often report feeling like the same person they have always been. This continuity of identity is maintained not by unchanging traits, but by a continuous narrative, a story that each person tells themselves about who they are, where they have been, and where they are going. Personality, in this sense, is not just a set of traits. It is a story, a living, evolving autobiography that provides coherence and meaning to the otherwise chaotic stream of experience. This idea that personality is fundamentally a narrative has been developed most fully by psychologist Dan McAdams, who argues that personality operates on three levels. The first level is dispositional traits, the broad, stable tendencies captured by the Big Five. The second level is characteristic adaptations, the goals, values, coping strategies, and relational patterns that people develop in response to their specific life circumstances. And the third level is the narrative identity, the internalized, evolving story of the self that integrates past, present, and future into a coherent whole. According to McAdams, it is at the level of narrative identity that personality becomes most deeply personal and most uniquely human. Your Big Five profile tells us what you're like in general. Your characteristic adaptations tell us what you want and how you go about getting it. But your narrative identity tells us who you are, the specific, irreducible, deeply personal story that gives your life meaning and direction. Let us now explore a finding about personality that is both practically useful and conceptually elegant, the concept of personality-environment fit. This idea, developed across decades of research in industrial organizational psychology, vocational psychology, and environmental psychology, holds that well-being and performance are maximized when there is a good fit between an individual's personality and the demands and rewards of their environment. A classic example is the person-job fit. An extrovert placed in a solitary, low-stimulation job will likely feel understimulated, bored, and restless. An introvert placed in a high-pressure sales position will likely feel overstimulated, drained, and anxious. Neither person is deficient, both are capable, but neither is in an environment that matches their personality, and the mismatch generates stress, dissatisfaction, and underperformance. The same principle applies to person-organization fit, person-culture fit, and even person-relationship fit. When you find yourself in an environment that aligns with your personality, that rewards your strengths, accommodates your needs, and challenges you at a level you can manage, you thrive. When the fit is poor, you struggle. And many of the problems that people attribute to personal inadequacy, feeling like they are in the wrong career, the wrong city, the wrong relationship, are actually problems of fit. The issue is not that something is wrong with them. The issue is that something is wrong with the match between who they are and where they are. Understanding personality-environment fit can transform the way people make decisions about their lives. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" they can ask, "What kind of environment would bring out the best in someone like me?" This reframing is not just practically useful, it is psychologically liberating. It shifts the locus of responsibility from self-blame to self-knowledge, from the pursuit of an impossible ideal to the pursuit of a realistic fit. Let us now discuss something that personality science has increasingly turned its attention to in recent years: the relationship between personality and physical appearance. This is a topic that makes many people uncomfortable because it suggests that aspects of personality, which we like to think of as deep, internal, and invisible, may be written on the surface of the body. Research has found small but consistent associations between physical features and personality traits. Facial structure, for example, has been linked to dominance and aggression. Men with wider faces relative to facial height, a metric known as the facial width-to-height ratio, tend to score higher on measures of aggression, dominance, and willingness to exploit others. This association is thought to reflect the influence of testosterone, which shapes both facial bone structure during development and behavioral tendencies toward dominance and competitiveness. Body type has also been linked to personality. Individuals with more muscular, mesomorphic builds tend to score higher on extroversion and physical activity, while individuals with thinner, ectomorphic builds tend to score higher on introversion and neuroticism. These associations are modest and should not be used to judge individuals, but they are statistically real and they speak to the deep connections between body and mind, between physical form and psychological function. There is also the fascinating question of whether personality is visible in the face. Research using machine learning algorithms has shown that computer models can predict personality traits from facial photographs at levels above chance, though the accuracy is far lower than prediction from behavioral data like social media activity. The cues may include facial muscle tension patterns, habitual expressions, and other subtle features shaped by years of emotional experience. A person who smiles frequently develops different facial musculature than a person who frowns frequently, and these accumulated physical traces of temperament may be detectable, at least statistically, even in a neutral photograph. This area of research is controversial, and for good reason. The history of attempting to read character from physical appearance, from phrenology to physiognomy, is littered with pseudoscience and prejudice. Modern researchers are careful to emphasize that the associations are small, that individual prediction is unreliable, and that these findings must never be used to stereotype or discriminate. But the underlying finding that personality leaves physical traces on the body is consistent with the broader theme of this documentary. Personality is not hidden. It is expressed in everything you do, everything you say, and even in the face you present to the world. Now let us explore something that has become increasingly relevant in the modern world, the relationship between personality and social media behavior. We have already discussed how digital footprints can be used to predict personality, but the relationship between personality and social media is far richer than mere prediction. Social media platforms have become laboratories for personality expression, environments that amplify certain traits and suppress others, arenas where the drama of human personality plays out in real time. Extroverts tend to have larger social networks on social media, to post more frequently, and to share more photographs and personal updates. They use social media as an extension of their offline social behavior, a tool for maintaining connections, seeking social stimulation, and broadcasting their experiences. Introverts tend to use social media more selectively, often preferring platforms that allow for deeper, more curated forms of self-expression, written posts rather than live videos, thoughtful comments rather than rapid-fire interactions. Narcissistic individuals are particularly active on social media, using it as a stage for self-promotion and a source of the admiration they crave. They post more selfies, update their profile pictures more frequently, and spend more time curating their online image. Research has found that narcissism is one of the strongest personality predictors of selfie posting frequency, a finding that will surprise no one who has spent time scrolling through a social media feed. But here is the darker side of the personality-social media relationship. Social media use can exacerbate the negative aspects of certain personality traits. Neurotic individuals who use social media heavily may find that it amplifies their anxiety, their tendency towards social comparison, and their sensitivity to rejection. Every unanswered message becomes a potential slight. Every photograph of friends having fun without them becomes evidence of exclusion. The curated perfection of other people's online lives becomes a mirror in which their own perceived inadequacies are magnified. Individuals with low self-esteem often use social media seeking validation, but the validation they receive is thin, fleeting, and ultimately unsatisfying. A like on a post provides a momentary spike of positive feeling, but it does not address the underlying insecurity. And the addictive cycle of posting, checking for responses, feeling briefly validated, and then needing to post again can trap vulnerable individuals in a loop of shallow reinforcement that never provides the deep, sustained sense of worth they truly need. There is also the phenomenon of online disinhibition, the tendency for people to behave more aggressively, more impulsively, and more cruelly online than they would in face-to-face interactions. This disinhibition effect is partly situational. The anonymity and physical distance of online communication reduce the social consequences of bad behavior, but it is also partly personality-driven. Individuals high in dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and everyday sadism, are significantly more likely to engage in trolling, cyberbullying, and other forms of online aggression. The internet does not create these tendencies, but it provides an environment in which they can be expressed with minimal accountability. Let us now turn to a dimension of personality that is often overlooked but that has enormous practical importance: grit. Grit, as defined by psychologist Angela Duckworth, is the combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. It is the ability to maintain effort and interest over years, despite failure, adversity, and periods of stagnation. Grit is related to conscientiousness. The two constructs share a common core of self-discipline and persistence, but grit emphasizes the long-term dimension, the capacity to stay committed to a goal not just for days or weeks, but for years and decades. Duckworth's research has shown that grit predicts achievement in a variety of demanding contexts: military training, academic performance, spelling bee competitions, and professional success, often over and above the predictions made by talent, intelligence, or other personality traits. The grittiest individuals are not necessarily the most talented, but they are the most persistent. They are the ones who keep going when others quit, who view setbacks as temporary rather than terminal, and who maintain a deep, sustained commitment to their chosen path even when progress is slow and recognition is scarce. Here is the surprising finding about grit that challenges the popular narrative: grit is not always beneficial. In some contexts, extreme grit can become stubbornness, a refusal to abandon a failing course of action, to change direction when the evidence clearly indicates that a different path would be wiser. The grittiest individuals may persist in pursuing goals that are unrealistic, unhealthy, or no longer aligned with their values, because their identity has become so entangled with the pursuit that letting go feels like a form of self-betrayal. This is the paradox of grit. The same quality that enables extraordinary achievement can also trap people in cycles of diminishing returns. The key, research suggests, is not maximum grit but flexible grit, the ability to persist when persistence is warranted and to redirect when redirection is wise. This flexibility requires self-awareness, humility, and a willingness to distinguish between the goals that deserve unwavering commitment and the goals that have outlived their usefulness. Now let us discuss a topic that connects personality to the fundamental question of human well-being: the relationship between personality and happiness. This is one of the most extensively studied topics in personality psychology, and the findings have profound implications for how we understand the pursuit of a good life. The two personality traits most strongly associated with subjective well-being, the scientific term for happiness, are extroversion and neuroticism. Extroverts tend to be happier, reporting more frequent positive emotions, greater life satisfaction, and a stronger sense of vitality and engagement. Neurotic individuals tend to be less happy, reporting more frequent negative emotions, more dissatisfaction, and a greater sense of being overwhelmed by life's demands. These associations are robust. They have been replicated across cultures, across age groups, and across methods of measurement. They are not artifacts of self-report bias or cultural expectation. They reflect genuine differences in the way different personalities experience the emotional texture of daily life. But here is the nuance that transforms this finding from a simple observation into a profound insight. The relationship between personality and happiness is not purely a matter of emotional reactivity. it is also a matter of behavioral choices. Extroverts are happier partly because they feel positive emotions more intensely, but also because they make choices that increase the likelihood of positive experiences. They socialize more, they engage in more activities, they are more proactive in pursuing goals, and they spend more time in environments that provide stimulation and reward. Their happiness is not just something that happens to them. It is something they actively create through their behavioral tendencies. This insight has a liberating implication. If happiness is partly a product of behavioral choices, then even individuals who are temperamentally less inclined toward positive emotion can increase their well-being by deliberately adopting behaviors associated with happiness, socializing more, engaging in meaningful activities, pursuing goals, expressing gratitude, and cultivating positive relationships. They may not reach the same emotional baseline as a naturally extroverted person, but they can move meaningfully in the direction of greater well-being. Personality sets the range. Behavior determines where within that range you fall. There is another finding about personality and happiness that deserves serious attention. Research has consistently shown that materialism, the pursuit of wealth and possessions as a primary source of life satisfaction, is associated with lower well-being. And materialism, in turn, is associated with specific personality traits: low agreeableness, low self-esteem, and high neuroticism. Materialistic individuals tend to be less trusting, more competitive, more anxious, and more focused on social comparison. They use material possessions as a proxy for the emotional security they lack, but the security that possessions provide is always temporary, always insufficient, always requiring the next purchase to sustain. The happiest people, research suggests, are not those who have the most, but those whose personality inclines them toward gratitude, social connection, purposeful engagement, and the ability to savor simple pleasures. These are qualities that money cannot buy and that personality profoundly shapes. Let us now explore a frontier of personality science that is both thrilling and sobering: the relationship between personality and artificial intelligence. As AI systems become more sophisticated, researchers have begun asking whether machines can not only detect human personality but also simulate it. The answer, increasingly, is yes, at least at a surface level. Modern large language models can generate text that mimics the linguistic patterns of different personality types. They can be prompted to respond as an extrovert or an introvert, as a neurotic or a stable individual, and the resulting text is often convincing to human judges. Chatbots and virtual assistants are being designed with specific personality profiles to maximize user engagement and satisfaction. Some users prefer a warm, agreeable virtual assistant. Others prefer one that is more direct and task-focused. The personality of the machine, or more precisely, the simulated personality, influences how people interact with it, how much they trust it, and how satisfied they are with the experience. But the simulation of personality raises profound ethical and philosophical questions. If a chatbot can convincingly mimic empathy, does it matter that the empathy is not real? If a virtual assistant can make a lonely person feel understood, is the relationship meaningful or merely an illusion? And if AI systems can detect personality from digital footprints and then tailor their communication style to exploit individual psychological vulnerabilities, what safeguards are needed to prevent manipulation? These questions are not theoretical, they are urgent. The convergence of personality science and artificial intelligence has created tools of extraordinary power, tools that can be used to educate, to heal, to connect, and to empower, but that can also be used to deceive, to manipulate, and to control. The future of this convergence will be shaped not by the technology itself, but by the values and wisdom of the humans who deploy it. Let us now turn to a question that sits at the very heart of this documentary. Can you change your personality? We have already discussed the evidence that personality changes naturally over the lifespan. But the question here is more specific and more personal. Can you deliberately, intentionally change your own personality traits? The answer, based on the latest research, is a cautious but genuine yes. Clinical interventions, including psychotherapy, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, have been shown to produce meaningful changes in personality traits, particularly reductions in neuroticism. A meta-analysis of over 200 studies found that psychological interventions produce significant changes in personality traits, with the largest effects observed for neuroticism and the fastest changes occurring within the first month of treatment. But deliberate personality change is not limited to clinical settings. Research on volitional personality change that occurs through conscious intention and sustained effort, suggests that people who set specific goals related to personality change, who monitor their progress, who practice new behaviors consistently, and who seek environments that support the desired change can achieve measurable shifts in their trait profiles over months and years. Here is an example. An introvert who wants to become more socially confident can set specific behavioral goals, initiating one conversation per day, attending one social event per week, practicing assertive communication in low-stakes situations. Over time, these behaviors become more natural, more automatic, and the underlying trait, or at least its behavioral expression, shifts. The introvert does not become an extrovert, but they become a more socially skilled, more socially confident introvert, and that shift can make a meaningful difference in their quality of life. There are limits, however. Personality change is slow, effortful, and often incomplete. Deeply ingrained traits, shaped by decades of genetic expression and environmental reinforcement, do not yield easily to conscious intention. And there is a risk of inauthenticity, of trying to become someone you are not, driven by social pressure or internalized ideals rather than genuine self-knowledge. The healthiest approach to personality change, research suggests, is not to wage war against your nature, but to work with it, to identify the specific aspects of your personality that are causing suffering or limiting your potential, and to develop targeted strategies for shifting those aspects while honoring and leveraging your strengths. Let us now explore a dimension of personality that is rarely discussed in scientific contexts, but that profoundly shapes the quality of human life: the capacity for awe. Awe is a complex emotion triggered by encounters with vastness, physical, intellectual, or spiritual, that challenge existing mental frameworks and require accommodation. Standing before a mountain range, contemplating the scale of the universe, witnessing an act of extraordinary courage or compassion, these experiences can trigger a state of awe that is characterized by a sense of smallness, a dissolution of ego boundaries, and a feeling of connection to something larger than the self. Research has shown that the personality trait most strongly associated with the capacity for awe is openness to experience. Open individuals are more likely to seek out awe-inspiring experiences, to respond to them with emotional intensity, and to find in them a source of meaning and perspective that enriches their daily lives. But awe is not limited to the naturally open-minded. It can be cultivated through exposure to nature, through engagement with art and music, through practices like meditation and contemplation, and through a deliberate orientation toward the vast and the mysterious. Here is what makes the capacity for awe so important. Research has shown that awe has measurable psychological and physiological benefits. It reduces inflammatory cytokines, markers of chronic stress and disease risk. It increases prosocial behavior, generosity, cooperation, and a willingness to help strangers. It enhances life satisfaction. And it shifts attention away from the narrow concerns of the self toward a broader perspective that encompasses the welfare of others and the beauty of the world. In a culture saturated with stimulation but starved of wonder, the capacity for awe may be one of the most important personality resources available. It is a corrective to cynicism, a remedy for self-absorption, and a gateway to the kind of deep, meaningful engagement with life that personality science has consistently linked to human flourishing. Let us now discuss the relationship between personality and the experience of loneliness. Loneliness, the painful feeling that your social connections are inadequate in quantity or quality, is one of the great epidemics of modern life. And personality plays a significant role in determining who is vulnerable to loneliness and who is protected. Neuroticism is the strongest personality predictor of loneliness. Neurotic individuals are more sensitive to social rejection, more likely to interpret ambiguous social cues as negative, and more prone to withdrawing from social contact as a way of protecting themselves from anticipated pain. Ironically, the very behaviors that neurotic individuals use to protect themselves, social withdrawal, emotional guardedness, preemptive rejection, often create the very isolation they fear. Introversion is also associated with loneliness, but the relationship is more complex than it appears. Introverts are not inherently lonely. Many introverts are deeply satisfied with a small number of close, meaningful relationships. But introverts who desire more social connection than they currently have, whose social needs are unmet, not because they need many friends, but because the friendships they have lack depth or reciprocity, are at risk for loneliness. Agreeableness provides a buffer against loneliness. Agreeable individuals are warmer, more empathetic, and more skilled at maintaining harmonious relationships. They tend to attract social support more readily and to reciprocate it more generously, creating a positive feedback loop that sustains their social networks over time. Here is the fact about loneliness that makes it a personality issue of the highest importance. Loneliness is not just an emotional state, it is a health risk. Chronic loneliness has been associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, weakened immune function, cognitive decline, depression, and premature death. The health effects of chronic loneliness are comparable in magnitude to the effects of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This is not a metaphor. It is a statistical finding, replicated across multiple large-scale studies. This means that personality traits that predispose individuals to loneliness, high neuroticism, extreme introversion, low agreeableness, are indirectly personality risk factors for serious physical illness. Understanding this connection can motivate individuals, communities, and healthcare systems to take loneliness seriously, not as a trivial emotional complaint, but as a genuine threat to health and longevity that deserves attention, intervention, and compassion. Let us now explore a topic that connects personality to one of the most private dimensions of human experience, the inner monologue. Most people are aware that they have a voice in their head, a running commentary that accompanies their waking hours, narrating, evaluating, planning, worrying, reminiscing, and imagining. But not everyone experiences inner speech in the same way, and the nature of a person's inner monologue is closely linked to their personality. Neurotic individuals tend to have inner monologues that are more negative, more repetitive, and more focused on self-criticism and threat anticipation. Their internal voice is often harsh, judgmental, and relentless, a constant stream of worry and self-doubt that colors their experience of every situation. This negative inner speech is not just a reflection of neuroticism. It is a mechanism through which neuroticism exerts its effects. The neurotic individual does not simply feel anxious. They talk themselves into anxiety, rehearsing catastrophic scenarios, and reminding themselves of past failures in an endless internal loop. Individuals high in openness to experience tend to have richer, more varied inner monologues, incorporating vivid imagery, abstract ideas, and creative associations. Their internal world is more like a kaleidoscope than a loudspeaker, shifting, colorful, and full of unexpected connections. This rich inner life is one of the reasons why open individuals are drawn to creative pursuits. Their minds are already generating the raw material of creativity, novel combinations, unusual perspectives, imaginative scenarios, as a natural byproduct of their cognitive style. Here is a finding that surprises many people. Not everyone has an inner monologue. A subset of the population experiences very little internal verbal narration, relying instead on visual imagery, abstract knowing, or emotional sensing to navigate their inner world. This condition, sometimes called unsymbolized thinking, is not a disorder. It is a normal variant of human cognitive experience. and it is associated with specific personality traits, particularly lower neuroticism and lower verbal intelligence, though the research is still in its early stages. The diversity of inner experience is a reminder that personality is not just about outward behavior. It is about the texture of conscious experience itself, the quality of the inner world in which each person lives every moment of every day. Two people can behave identically in a given situation and yet inhabit radically different subjective realities, one filled with worry and self-criticism, the other filled with curiosity and calm. Let us now discuss a concept that has gained increasing attention in personality research, and that has profound implications for education, parenting, and personal development: the growth mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research has shown that people differ in their implicit beliefs about the malleability of personal qualities. Individuals with a fixed mindset believe that qualities like intelligence, talent, and personality are innate and largely unchangeable. Individuals with a growth mindset believe that these qualities can be developed through effort, learning, and practice. Mindset is not a traditional personality trait, but it functions like one. It is relatively stable over time, it predicts behavior across a range of situations, and it is associated with other personality dimensions. Growth mindset is positively correlated with openness to experience, conscientiousness, and emotional resilience. Fixed mindset is associated with higher neuroticism, greater fear of failure, and a tendency to avoid challenges that might expose inadequacy. The practical implications of mindset are enormous. Students with a growth mindset achieve more in school not because they are smarter, but because they are more willing to embrace challenges, to persist through difficulty, and to view failure as a learning opportunity rather than a verdict on their ability. Employees with a growth mindset are more adaptable, more innovative, and more resilient in the face of organizational change. And individuals who approach their own personality with a growth mindset, who believe that they can develop greater emotional stability, greater social skill, greater self-discipline, are more likely to actually achieve those changes. This connects back to the earlier discussion of volitional personality change. The belief that personality can change is itself a personality-relevant belief, and it influences whether change actually occurs. If you believe your neuroticism is fixed and permanent, you are less likely to invest the effort needed to reduce it. If you believe that with practice and support you can become more emotionally resilient, you are more likely to engage in the behaviors and seek the resources that make resilience possible. Belief does not guarantee change, but it opens the door. Let us now explore the relationship between personality and moral behavior. This is a topic of immense philosophical and practical importance, and the findings are both illuminating and humbling. Agreeableness is the personality trait most consistently associated with moral behavior, with honesty, compassion, forgiveness, and concern for the welfare of others. Agreeable individuals are more likely to cooperate in social dilemmas, to volunteer their time, to donate to charity, and to behave ethically in professional contexts. Their natural orientation toward warmth and empathy makes moral behavior feel intuitive, almost effortless, not the product of deliberate moral reasoning, but the spontaneous expression of a caring temperament. Conscientiousness is also associated with moral behavior, but through a different mechanism. Conscientious individuals are moral not because they feel strong empathy, though they may, but because they feel a strong sense of duty and obligation. They follow rules, honor commitments, and fulfill responsibilities because their personality demands consistency, reliability, and adherence to standards. But here is the uncomfortable truth about personality and morality. No personality trait guarantees moral behavior. Agreeable individuals can be manipulated into compliance with unethical demands because their desire to maintain harmony overrides their moral objections. Conscientious individuals can enforce unjust rules with meticulous efficiency because their sense of duty overrides their independent moral judgment. And individuals with dark triad traits can behave morally when it serves their strategic interests, when honesty is more profitable than deception, when cooperation yields greater returns than exploitation. Moral behavior, the research suggests, is not a simple function of personality. It is the product of a complex interaction between personality traits, moral reasoning, situational pressures, cultural norms, and personal values. Personality provides the raw material, the emotional tendencies, the motivational orientations, the cognitive styles, but it does not determine the moral outcome. That determination requires something more: wisdom, reflection, and the willingness to act on principle even when personality pulls in a different direction. As we near the end of this documentary, let us turn to one of the most profound questions in all of personality science. What is the relationship between personality and meaning in life? Meaning, the sense that your life has purpose, significance, and coherence, is one of the strongest predictors of psychological well-being, even more powerful than happiness in some studies. And personality plays a central role in determining whether and how people find meaning. Extroversion and conscientiousness are associated with a sense of purpose, the feeling that you have goals worth pursuing and a direction worth following. Open individuals find meaning through exploration, creativity, and the pursuit of understanding. Agreeable individuals find meaning through relationships, service, and the welfare of others. And neurotic individuals, despite their emotional suffering, sometimes find meaning through the very act of grappling with difficulty, transforming their pain into insight, their anxiety into vigilance, their sensitivity into art. Here is the finding that ties everything together. Research has shown that meaning in life is most strongly predicted not by any single personality trait, but by the coherence of the narrative identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are and why your life matters. Individuals who have a clear, coherent, emotionally integrated story of their life, one that acknowledges both suffering and joy, both failure and growth, report the highest levels of meaning, regardless of their specific personality profile. This means that meaning is available to every personality type. The extrovert finds it in connection. The introvert finds it in depth. The conscientious person finds it in accomplishment. The open person finds it in discovery. The agreeable person finds it in love. And even the neurotic person, the person who feels everything too deeply, who worries too much, who cannot stop the anxious voice in their head, can find meaning by weaving their suffering into a story of resilience, growth, and hard-won wisdom. Personality is not a prison. It is not a label. It is not a box. It is the medium through which you experience the world, the lens through which you see, the instrument through which you feel, the voice through which you speak. It is the most personal thing about you, and yet it connects you to every other human being who has ever lived, because every human being has grappled with the same fundamental questions. Who am I? Why am I this way? Can I change? And does it matter? The answer, as we have seen across the course of this documentary, is yes, it matters enormously. Your personality shapes your health, your relationships, your career, your happiness, your creativity, your politics, your spirituality, your experience of time, your inner monologue, and your confrontation with the deepest questions of human existence. Understanding your personality with honesty, with compassion, with curiosity, is one of the most valuable investments you will ever make, not because self-knowledge will make you perfect, but because it will make you wiser, kinder, more resilient, and more fully alive. We began this documentary with a challenge: you think you know yourself. And now, after this long journey through the science of personality, we end with a different kind of challenge, an invitation. Look at yourself again. Look at the people around you. See the complexity, the beauty, the struggle, the magnificence of human personality in all its infinite variation. See it in the shy child who watches from the corner of the playground. See it in the bold executive who takes the stage without hesitation. See it in the anxious friend who calls at midnight needing reassurance. See it in the calm stranger who holds the door with quiet grace. Every one of these people is carrying a personality, a vast, intricate, partially hidden architecture of traits, adaptations, stories, and possibilities. Every one of them is navigating the same fundamental challenge: how to be themselves in a world that is constantly asking them to be something else. The science of personality does not have all the answers. It is still young, still evolving, still full of unanswered questions and unresolved debates, but it has given us something precious, a framework for understanding the most complex and consequential phenomenon in the known universe, the human self. And perhaps that is the most surprising fact of all. Not any single finding about genetics or neuroscience or the gut microbiome, but the simple, staggering fact that you, the person watching this right now, in whatever city, in whatever time zone, at whatever hour of the day or night, you are a miracle of complexity. Your personality is unlike any personality that has ever existed or will ever exist again. It is shaped by forces both ancient and immediate, both visible and invisible, both chosen and unchosen. And it is still being shaped right now in this very moment by the choices you make, the stories you tell, and the meaning you dare to find. Thank you for joining us on this journey. The architecture of who you are is vast, and we have only begun to explore it. But every journey begins with a single step, and the most important step is the one that turns your gaze inward, toward the extraordinary, surprising, endlessly fascinating landscape of your own personality.